In 1960, an Australian man experienced unimaginable luck. He won the lottery jackpot of $5 million. At that moment, he was overcome with indescribable joy, feeling as though the world was at his feet and the gates of paradise had been flung wide open before him. However, as the saying goes, all that glitters is not gold. This overwhelming happiness quickly evaporated, replaced by a true tragedy that turned his life upside down. The money became a curse, and his misery intensified to the point where he cried out in deep regret, wishing the win had never happened, that the prize had never entered his life. In 1960, as the Australian city of Sydney embarked on the construction of its most famous landmark, the Opera House, authorities faced a formidable challenge due to the project's exorbitant costs. To address this crisis, the City Council decided to organize massive lotteries to finance the construction. There, people rushed to buy millions of tickets, chasing the mirage of immense wealth and selling themselves rosy dreams of changing their lives overnight. However, the harsh reality is that winning these lotteries is virtually impossible. For every single winner, there are hundreds of thousands of losers whose money was wasted, while the organizers remain the ultimate beneficiaries, taking the lion's share of the dreamers' funds. The city of Sydney announced a major lottery to fund the construction of the Sydney Opera House. Tens of thousands rushed to buy tickets, and the city made a fortune. But the real hero of the story was a man named Buzz Thorne. Imagine the astonishment. While others spent vast sums on hundreds of tickets, Buzz bought just one. Incredibly, that single ticket won the grand prize. Luck had smiled upon him beyond all imagination, and the dream of instant wealth that haunts millions had come true. The prize was worth 100,000 Australian pounds, a huge sum at the time, equivalent to about $5 million today. This fortune was enough to change Buzz's life and that of his family forever, transforming them from ordinary to incredibly wealthy. These competitions seem almost unbelievable. For every single winner, there are hundreds of thousands, or even millions of losers, while the organizers and companies remain the true beneficiaries. However, in 1960, the Sydney City Council announced a lottery for the Opera House, revealing enormous prizes for the winners. Tens of thousands of people flocked to buy tickets, and the council, of course, made a substantial profit that helped fund the construction of the Opera House. Among the participants in this lottery was a man named Buzz Thorne, and imagine his boundless joy when he was announced as the winner of the grand prize. The man couldn't believe what had happened. All he'd bought was a single ticket, while others had spent fortunes on numerous tickets, yet he'd won with his one ticket. His luck was beyond belief. His dream of winning the lottery and becoming incredibly wealthy had come true, and now his life and the lives of his family would be completely transformed. The prize was worth 100,000 Australian pounds, the currency in circulation in Australia at the time. Converted to dollars, adjusting for inflation and the difference in value today, it's equivalent to about $5 million, a life-changing prize. Buzz Thorne was a 37-year-old marketer or traveling salesman. His job required him to travel between cities to promote his products, a very demanding job with a below-average income. He lived with his family in a modest ground-floor apartment in the Bondi area of Sydney. His family consisted of his wife, Frida Thorne, and their two children, 8-year-old Graham and 3-year-old Belinda. When Buzz Thorne won the lottery, he knew his life and his family's life would change drastically, and they would finally enjoy comfort and freedom, far removed from the financial burdens that had long weighed him down. However, the laws at the time required the publication of the winner's name and picture in major competitions, and even his home address. There was no room for privacy. The winner was obligated to be on the front pages of newspapers and television screens everywhere. Of course, this fame had its downsides. Buzz Thorne suddenly found himself besieged by people from all directions. Journalists knocked on his door day and night, neighbors and acquaintances fawned over him, and even relatives he hadn't seen in years suddenly remembered their family ties. Not to mention the charities and organizations that began bombarding him with requests to donate even a small portion of his enormous prize. The man and his family's lives have been turned upside down due to the lack of privacy and the public disclosure of details of their lives. But Buzz Thorne wasn't bothered. The euphoria of winning far outweighed any annoyance at what he considered minor inconveniences. He and his wife were carefully planning how to use the money to improve their lives. They decided not to rush into anything, but to think things through calmly, because they knew that many lottery winners lose their minds. Some quit their jobs immediately, some buy whatever they desire, or they start spending money recklessly, only to find themselves back at square one, or worse, burdened with debt. Stories of such winners who squandered their fortunes were commonplace even then. So, Buzz Thorne and his wife resolved to handle things wisely and patiently. Buzz even had no intention of quitting his demanding job as a street vendor just yet. He decided to continue until they had a clear plan for the future, a very wise move on their part. But even if a person is wise and intelligent in their choices, sometimes things don't go as planned. The family's youngest son, Graham, aged 8, was a student at a private school in Sydney. The school was far from their home, so he couldn't walk. He needed a car. Since his father traveled frequently for his work as a traveling salesman, and his mother didn't know how to drive, they had to find someone to take him to school. Luckily for them, a family friend named Mrs. Phyllis Smith, who had 2 sons who attended the same school and lived nearby, had arranged for Mrs. Smith to pick up Graham and drop him off with her own children, as she was a driver. On the morning of Thursday, July 7, 1960, Mrs. Frida Thorne sent her son Graham to school as usual, and the same routine was repeated. Graham leaves his house at 8:30 in the morning and walks a short distance to a corner of O'Brien Street. This corner is close to his home and has a small shop, so he doesn't have to walk far. There, he waits for his family friend, Mrs. Phyllis Smith, to give him a ride with her 2 sons. They attended the same school and lived nearby, so they had a long-standing arrangement whereby Mrs. Phyllis would drive their son and drop him off with her own children. The reason Mrs. Smith didn't come to the door was that the corner was directly on the way to school, so it was better for him to walk there rather than going through the alleys and neighborhood. That particular morning, one of his classmates saw him heading to his usual spot by the shop. A few minutes later, Mrs. Fells arrived at the corner, but there was no sign of Graham. She sent one of her sons to look around, thinking he might have gone into the store, but the boy quickly returned and told her he hadn't found him. Mrs. Fells immediately decided to go to the Thornes' house to check. She knocked on the door, calling for Frida. Frida's mother answered and was surprised to see her. Mrs. Fells asked if her son was home, thinking he might be ill. Frida's mother replied immediately, "No, he left at 8:30. Mrs. Fells told her she hadn't found him in his usual spot and that her children had looked for him without success. Frida was terrified. Mrs. Fells said she would go to the school to ask if someone else had dropped him off. Frida waited anxiously. After a short while, Mrs. Fells returned and told her that Graham wasn't at school, but a classmate had seen him on the way to the corner. At that point, Frida knew something had happened to her son and immediately called the police for help. Incidentally, Buzz Thorne wasn't home. He was away on business in another city. A detective from the Bondi police arrived shortly afterward, and while he was trying to reassure the mother, the house phone rang. Frida answered, and the caller asked, "Is this the Thorne home? Are you Frida, Graham's mother?" She placed her hand on her heart and answered yes. The man immediately said, "Your son, Graham, is with me." The mother's heart sank, and she trembled with terror. The detective noticed this and realized the caller was the kidnapper. He gestured for the mother to hand him the phone and pretended to be the father. The kidnapper said, "Your son is with me, and I won't release him without a ransom." The detective replied, "We'll do what you want, just don't harm the boy." The kidnapper said, "By 5 p.m., have 25,000 Australian pounds ready, an amount equivalent to more than $1 million today, a quarter of the prize they had won." The information came from a source, most likely a police officer. Naturally, this news was shocking, not only because the kidnapped child was the son of the lottery winner, but also because child abduction was unprecedented in Australia at the time. This was the first recorded case of a child being kidnapped for ransom in modern Australian history. Even the most hardened gangs and criminals didn't resort to kidnapping children, even if they had an enemy with a family. Targeting children was considered taboo. Because of this, the press and media paid close attention to the case, and unfortunately, crowds began gathering around the Thorne family's home, harassing the investigators and police. The police knew this gathering would complicate the case. Perhaps seeing the increased public and media attention would intimidate the kidnapper, causing him to break off contact or abandon the entire operation. The police wanted to give him a chance to state his demands clearly and quietly so they could take the necessary steps. But the story was published in the newspapers much faster than expected. The Daily Mirror covered the story in its edition that same day, even running a poster in their newspaper with the headline, "I'll feed him to the sharks," quoting the kidnapper's words. Several hours later, the kidnapper called again, and the same detective who had answered the first call took his call. The kidnapper instructed that the money be placed in 3 separate bags and ready for delivery at 5 p.m. This was his only demand. He gave no further instructions and hung up. 5 p.m. arrived, and he didn't call back. He didn't specify a location for the delivery, nor did he provide any further details. It's highly likely that he didn't call again because he saw the intense interest in the case and its widespread coverage in newspapers, on television, and among the public. Overcome with fear, he decided to cut off contact, which is exactly what the police feared. Now, only God knows when the kidnapper will contact us again, or if he even intends to. As for the father, Basil Thorne, he was away on business in another city when his son disappeared. Upon being informed, he boarded the first flight back to Sydney. Upon landing, he was greeted by crowds of people and journalists who bombarded him with questions. But he paid them no heed, his only concern being to return to his family. After arriving home and checking on his wife, he sat down with the investigators to discuss their next steps. The dilemma lay in the hijacker's refusal to re-establish contact, and they had no way to reach him as his calls were being made from public payphones on the street. After considering the situation, they decided the best course of action was for Basil to appear before the media himself and address the hijacker, attempting to persuade him to contact them again. Basil then went with the investigators to the Bondi police station, where they arranged a press conference that drew a large crowd of journalists and media cameras. On air, the father addressed the kidnapper, pleading with him through his tears, how the joy of winning the reward turned into unparalleled misery and sorrow. From the very first day, authorities launched a massive search for the missing child in every corner of Sydney. Most of the investigators and officers involved in the case felt deep empathy, and many were emotionally affected beyond measure. It wasn't just the police. The general public couldn't believe that someone would kidnap a child for ransom, sparking widespread outrage. Australians followed the case with bated breath through newspapers and news channels, as if the kidnapped child were their own. A pall of gloom hung over the entire society. The police issued a public alert, began monitoring main roads and key entry points like airports and seaports, and searched every possible location within the city. Surprisingly, the authorities even enlisted the help of some known gangs in the search. Organized crime bosses in Sydney unleashed their men to search for the child and find the kidnapper. Although some officers feared the gangs might kill the kidnapper once they found him instead of bringing him to justice, the police's top priority was saving the child's life. The fate of the criminal was not their concern at that time. The case became a major public issue, so much so that the government reacted to the public outcry and began discussing reclassifying kidnapping as a capital offense. At the time, the maximum penalty for kidnapping was only 10 years in prison, so a proposal was put forward to significantly increase the sentence. The government also offered a reward of £5,000 for information leading to the kidnapper's arrest or the child's recovery, an amount equivalent to approximately $250,000 today. The Daily Mirror, owned by a wealthy individual and the first to break the story, also announced an additional reward of £15,000. That's roughly equivalent to $750,000, bringing the total reward to nearly $1 million. The story of the kidnapping of the child Thorne dominated news platforms, and with this enormous reward, thousands of calls flooded the police. Investigators had to record and investigate every report or piece of information they received, even though much of it was vague or even misleading. Nevertheless, the police leadership assigned several officers to work on the case, and in this early stage of the investigation, Some evidence emerged from the testimonies of residents in the area surrounding the Thorne family home in the Bondi neighborhood. Some residents reported seeing a suspicious-looking man in the park directly in front of the house. They hadn't seen him just once or twice, but several times in the days leading up to the kidnapping. He appeared suspicious, holding a newspaper that covered most of his face, as if he were watching the area. Witnesses described the man as middle-aged, with a serious expression, a broad face, thick eyebrows, and wavy black hair that was beginning to bald. He was wearing a suit. When the police asked the Thorne family if they had seen anyone matching the description, the mother, Frida, immediately recalled an incident that had occurred 3 weeks before her son's abduction. She said she was doing chores when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to find a stranger who perfectly matched the description given by witnesses. The mother stated that the man had a European accent and told her he was looking for someone named Mr. Bogner. She replied that no one by that name lived there and that he must have had the wrong address. The man apologized and left quickly. Investigators searched the entire area and surrounding locations for anyone named Bogner, but found no trace of anyone by that name. This confirmed for them that the man had been watching the house and was using a false name. Since the mother had mentioned a European accent, this matched the kidnapper's accent, which investigators had noted during phone calls. Another key witness, a resident of the neighborhood where the family's home is located, also came forward. He reported that on the morning of the abduction, while driving near the Thorne family's house, he noticed a blue 1955 Ford Custom Line parked at the edge of an intersection, obstructing traffic. He was forced to swerve around it. He wondered why the driver had parked there and why he hadn't moved forward a little to avoid blocking the road. Taking a closer look at the driver, he was struck by his unusual appearance and distinctive, memorable features. The witness's description perfectly matched the previous accounts. A middle-aged man, somewhat overweight, with black hair and thick eyebrows, wearing a suit. The witness confirmed to the police that the car was definitely a blue 1955 Ford Custom Line.
Why would someone park there? Why not park down another 20 metres and make it easy for people or cars to get around? And that's more or less stood out in my mind at that particular stage.
The investigators were astonished by the accuracy of his description, and he explained that he was an expert on different makes and models of cars. To verify his credibility, the investigators presented him with a collection of car photographs and tested him on their names and models. All his answers were completely correct and accurate, making his testimony irrefutable evidence. They even took him for a drive, repeatedly asking him about the makes and models of cars they encountered. The man was remarkably accurate, confirming his extensive experience in the field, and they ultimately accepted his testimony and description of the car. The investigators then decided to try and locate the vehicle, assigning 25 officers to the headquarters of the Transport Authority in Sydney. This authority maintained a database of ownership and registration cards for all vehicles in the city. Of course, computers didn't exist back then. Everything was documented on paper. The police officers spent 3 full days searching through the registration cards, looking for every car that matched the description. A blue 1955 Ford Custom Line. Imagine, they examined over 270,000 registration cards and finally identified 5,000 cars that matched the description. They documented the details of these 5,000 cars and began trying to contact their owners for interviews. Of course, they couldn't reach everyone due to the lack of modern communication, but they tried to contact as many owners as possible. The police made tremendous efforts, and this approach would continue throughout the story. Their investigations were incredibly intelligent and painstaking, despite the limited resources and tools available at the time. No technology, no DNA testing, and no other modern methods. Furthermore, a crucial discovery was made on the second day after the kidnapping. Graham's school bag was found about 20 kilometers from the Bondi area, where the family home was located. The bag was found in a remote spot among bushes and weeds, thanks to the police dogs. This was the first tangible piece of evidence, confirming that the kidnapper had taken the child away from his family's residence. Following this discovery, hundreds of police officers, supported by police dogs, mobilized to search the surrounding area. A large number of Army and Navy personnel also participated in the search, with their vehicles, particularly helicopters. Even ordinary people, young and old, participated in the search. A public appeal was issued, and in these vast numbers, they combed the surrounding area inch by inch. They searched the streets, the trees, the forests, and the most difficult places, leaving no corner or spot untouched. Yet, this massive search yielded no results. The belongings of the child, Graham, that were in the bag were also meticulously examined by forensic experts. However, DNA analysis was not available at that time, so the analysis was inconclusive. During this period, reports continued to pour into the police from random individuals, each claiming to have seen Graham in a different place. Some said they saw him in a movie theater, others said they saw him riding in a car, or in a particular shop or street. The police had to investigate every single report, but none of them were true or led to any results. Most likely, these people had seen a child who resembled him, and they were all calling in the hope of winning the reward. Investigating this enormous number of reports, due to the case's notoriety, was a tremendous burden on the police. Imagine that within weeks this case became the biggest file for the police in all of Australia due to the large number of reports and investigations. Because they did not leave a single report without investigating it, even if it was strange or unusual. Imagine that even fortune tellers and charlatans claimed to know the boy's whereabouts, and the police had to scrutinize their claims. Besides these delusional individuals, there were also greedy and despicable people who wanted to exploit the situation for their own gain. They would contact the boy's family, claiming to have him and demanding a ransom of £25,000, which they instructed to be deposited in a garbage container or a public place. For example, a woman called Thorne's house, and when the father, Basil, answered, she claimed to be the kidnapper's accomplice and that his son was with her. She demanded the ransom and warned him not to contact the police. The father agreed but asked to speak to his son. The woman brought a child to talk on the phone, but the father immediately knew it wasn't his son's voice. To be sure, he asked the child personal questions, such as the name of his best friend. The child replied that he wasn't allowed to answer. The father pressed further, asking the child the name of the woman who drove him to school. The child remained silent. The woman then took back the phone and spoke harshly, threatening the father that he would never see his son again if he didn't comply. Despite believing she was lying, Basil decided to play along. The thought of ignoring her and the possibility that she was telling the truth was terrifying. He told her he would do what she wanted, and she asked him to bring £25,000 in a bag to a location west of Sydney. Basil alerted the police, fearing a trap, and 2 undercover officers accompanied him. Upon arriving at the location, a child approached and said a woman had asked him to take the bag. Basil asked the child where it was, and the child led him to the supposed spot. The police followed them but found no one. Basil questioned the child, who pointed to where she had been standing and said he didn't know her and that she had given him money to carry out the request. The situation ended there, and the identity of the woman, who turned out to be a con artist trying to exploit the situation and who fled when she sensed danger, remained unknown. She wasn't the only one claiming to be the kidnapper. Others tried to contact the parents by mail. The mother responded with personal questions that only her son would know, but ultimately, there was no reply. It was clear they were just a bunch of opportunists taking advantage of the situation. Each contact gave the parents a glimmer of hope that ended in despair. As for the original kidnapper, who had a European accent, he didn't contact them again, and it's likely he decided to disappear due to the attention and confusion the case generated. The investigators had to inform the parents, but the news had already spread through the media. The mother saw it on television and collapsed. The news shattered the entire Australian nation, which had been hoping for the boy's return. Why had the kidnapper killed him? The investigators were deeply moved and determined to punish the perpetrator. The officers meticulously examined the mattress, extracting every speck of dust and hair. Since DNA analysis was unavailable, they used a microscope. Dr. Cameron Crump examined a brown hair he found and confirmed it belonged to a Pekingese. Despite some skepticism, he stood by his conclusion. Dr. Joyce Vickery also analyzed plant and grass remains stuck to the mattress and identified 2 types of cypress plants that grow only in home gardens and are not usually found together in one garden, meaning they originated from the kidnapper's garden. She also examined the mold on the baby's boot and determined it was 7 weeks old, indicating that the kidnapper had killed him either immediately after the abduction or the following day. This puzzled the investigators. What would be the point of killing him if he wanted a ransom? Investigators also found pink soil particles that turned out to be brick mortar, traces of which were found on Graham's clothing. Police now had a description of the kidnapper's house. A house with 2 rare cypress trees in its garden, pink mortar, and a blue 1955 Ford Custom line owner and a brown Pekingese. This description was published in the media, and a report came in from neighbors in the Collintrave neighborhood about a man matching the description who had moved out of his house on the day of the kidnapping. His name was Stephen Bradley. The neighbors reported that his wife, Magda, had left with their children in a taxi that morning, while he stayed behind. Investigators looked into his background and discovered that he was an immigrant from Hungary, Eastern Europe. This explained his accent. They went to his house, which he had sold weeks earlier, and with the new owner's permission, they searched it and found 2 rare cypress plants and a pinkish hue in the garage. They even found a hair from the blanket that had wrapped the body. They confirmed that Bradley had owned a blue Ford, but he had sold it. They discovered that he had moved into an apartment in Manly on July 7, 1960, the day of the kidnapping. The apartment was empty, but among piles of rubbish, they found a roll of photographic film that its owner had tried to destroy. After cleaning and developing the film, they were shocked to find photos of Stephen Bradley with his family sitting on a blanket identical to the one used to wrap the body. Neighbors confirmed that he owned a Pekingese dog that he had left at a veterinary clinic for export. The police confiscated the dog, and its fur matched the hair found on the body. They also traced his car, which he had sold, and found fibers and hair in the trunk that matched Graham's clothing and hair. The charges were confirmed, but Bradley had already left Australia with his family on a ship bound for London. Police contacted the ship's captain to secretly monitor him until the ship reached Colombo, Sri Lanka. There, Sri Lankan authorities complied with Australia's request and arrested him. Bradley pleaded not guilty and resisted extradition due to the lack of an extradition treaty. After a weeks-long legal battle, he was handed over to Australian authorities. He was taken into custody by detectives Harry Bateman and Doyle. On the return flight, Bateman, using his characteristic tactic, managed to elicit a full confession from Bradley about everything that had happened, although it would not be officially released until later. Upon arrival in Sydney, Bradley was secretly transferred to avoid public outrage. The investigation began in November 1960, followed by the trial in March 1961. Bradley recanted his confession, claiming it had been obtained under duress, but the evidence was overwhelming. 70 witnesses and a mountain of scientific evidence. Based on what he told investigators, it appears he learned about Thorne from the media and decided to kidnap his son for money. He is an immigrant with a long criminal record, including fraud, falsifying qualifications, and even accusations of vandalizing his first wife's car and burning down his restaurant for insurance money. Thorne had been monitoring and plotting to kidnap the child, Belinda, but found Graham easier. On the morning of the kidnapping, Graham tricked the boy into believing that the woman who usually drove him was ill and that he was acting as her replacement. Graham got into the car with him. In a remote location, he drugged and tied the boy up, placed him in the trunk of the car, and then called the mother. He returned to his house, which he had emptied of his family to make it empty. When the boy began to regain consciousness and scream in the garage while furniture movers were present, Bradley struck him on the head with an iron bar, killing him. He then disposed of the body and the suitcase and sold his possessions to escape. The trial lasted only 9 days, and Bradley was sentenced to life imprisonment to public acclaim. He died of a heart attack in prison in 1968. As a result of Thorne's case, a law was enacted to protect the identities of lottery winners in Australia. That's the end of our story for today, but the lesson remains. If you enjoyed the story, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part affected you the most? See you in the next story. Goodbye.